Hello and welcome to Boosting You, our ultimate wellness platform. I'm Dr. Sue Peacock.
And I'm Shirley McLean. And I think that it's a must maybe today that we talk about inner chatter,
Mm.
that voice that we have in our head, because for many people, especially people who experience anxiety, it's such a huge factor. And I don't know about you, Sue, but I find it fascinating that how much it impacts on our decisions, our confidence, everything really.
Oh, yeah, Shirley, it really does, doesn't it? That inner voice can be absolutely brutal at times, can't it? Because that our unconscious mind, it can be so negative. It's usually there, isn't it? Raising objections or pointing out all the things that could go wrong. It doesn't speak to you as if it's your best friend at all, does it?
Oh, I know, absolutely. It's mad how we give, these voices so much authority, right? Like they're speaking the absolute truth rather than just firing off random thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. And what I've learned, over time is that chatter gets louder. Exactly when you're supposed to do something really important or you've got something new to do, hasn't it? And suddenly all these voices are shouting how bad it could be or how wrong it could go and all of that.
Yeah, I've noticed the same pattern. And, maybe if I'm not in my comfort zone, especially, and it's interesting because, the most successful people don't necessarily have less of that inner chatter either, than others. They've just developed a different relationship with it.
Uh, Absolutely. I've still got my inner critic. Absolutely. I've just learned not to take everything it says as truth now. So it's almost like I've got this sort of different relationship with mine. I know it's there and I acknowledge it, but I just do things anyway.
Yeah. And what was the turning point for you, Sue? When did you realize that you could change your relationship with the thoughts and that inner dialogue?
Well, I think it was probably because obviously studying psychology and hypnotherapy and understanding that it did have a positive intention, and I tried to make friends with it, to use it to work with me, sort of having and giving myself the choice whether to listen to it or not.
Yeah, and that's powerful, isn't it? I found something similar. Yeah, I think when we have the knowledge of what's going on, after all, it's just thoughts, and we can choose which ones deserve our attention. So I started treating these thoughts a bit as data rather than direction. So a bit like, oh, that's interesting, that my mind is going there instead of kind of like, I must listen to this warning and that kind of like helps me question my beliefs as well.
Mm-hmm.
After all, a belief's just a thought that we have over and over.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I found that works for me sometimes is sort of externalizing it. So, rather than focusing on all those sort of negative thoughts that I have, getting it out, getting those thoughts out of my head and onto paper, because once they're kind of written down, they can be more objective because you can say, well, if somebody said this to me, what would I say to them?
Yeah, yeah. And I sometimes speak the thoughts out loud. I like talking for me, as you know, and it somehow changes my relationship with them. They lose some of their power.
I think that's a really good approach, isn't it? And what I often say, is what would I say to my best friend? Would I say these things to my best friend? No, I absolutely wouldn't say those things to them. So, I wouldn't be harsh with somebody else. So why should I be as harsh on myself?
Yeah, and another thing I do is depending what that voice is saying, maybe, that it's going to be a disaster. I gather the evidence of times before when I've faced similar challenges, or experiences, and it's worked out okay or pretty good.
Yeah, 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 I think so. Evidence over emotion, absolutely every time. And do you know what I sometimes do? It's quite transformative. I can never say that word sometimes. It's kind of naming that voice. I call my critical inner voice Doris. Funny, but so I always focus on this inner voice Doris. She always focused on everything that could go wrong and was always really conservative about everything.
That's brilliant. And naming it does help.
It helps me, and so hopefully it'll help other people. So because now when I sort of hear those thoughts, I can say, oh, that's just Doris doing her job, rather than this must be the absolute truth. So it creates that sort of distance where you can be a bit more effective about it.
Yeah, there's another alternative as well, which works best, I suppose, for some individuals. So it can be a name, and it also can be kind of like things like a pattern, remembering that we are pattern making machines as well. So, I have a few like, oh, this is just my imposter syndrome talking. So if we think about a pattern or a name, whichever, or this is my perfectionism showing up again, do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes what I've learned over the years is, that inner chatter is actually trying to protect us. It's using outdated strategies from when we were younger.
Yeah, and that's such an important point, isn't it? These voices often were formed when we were children trying to stay safe or win approval. They're not malicious, they're just, using really outdated information.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think once you realize that, that kind of gives it that little bit of perspective, doesn't it? That you can actually, thank that voice and say, yeah, I appreciate you trying to keep me safe, but I've got this. I'm an adult now and I've got resources and experience to deal with whatever it is that you need to deal with.
Yeah, and I love that compassionate approach. So what would you suggest as a practical action step for someone who's struggling with overwhelming inner chatter?
That's a good question. So one thing I think is really helpful is if you take a few minutes each morning, each evening, whenever works best for you, to write down everything that's kind of circling around in your mind, almost like decluttering your brain, kind of all the worries, all the criticisms, all the what ifs, just write them all down. Just don't judge them, don't censor them, just get them out on paper. And then you can draw a line under them and say, okay, below that line, you write, today I choose to focus on, and then write down three things that actually will help you move forward today.
Oh, that's brilliant. It acknowledges the chatter, but doesn't let it drive the day.
Yeah, because, let's be honest, that inner chatter isn't going to go away completely, is it? The goal isn't silence, it's learning to hear the useful bits and just let go of the rest.
Yeah, and in that choice lies our power.
Mm,
That superpower,
yeah,
as when we're consciously aware of the patterns, the dialogue that we can choose. So, action step for today, daily ritual for today. If you want to introduce it into your daily routine to manage that inner chatter, set aside that few minutes whenever is right for you and just write that list, everything that's on my mind. Have a good head dump out everything on there, draw a line, the things that you're going to focus on as well. Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, that sounds great. And once you've kind of thought about your line that says today I choose to focus on and what you're specifying that you're going to focus on, then throughout the day when that unhelpful chatter returns, you can perhaps remind yourself gently of that chosen focus. Perhaps at the end of the day, briefly note which thoughts were helpful and which weren't. And practice that for a couple of weeks or so, noticing how that relationship with your inner dialogue begins to shift from being controlled by you directing it more purposefully.
Yeah, and I think, and we'd love to hear how you get on with that as well. And, there'll be times when, we suggest other ways as well to make friends with that other inner chatter that we've got. But today, let's just kind of like focus on this one, see how we get on. And until next time, I think that's a great place to leave it. It's bye from me.
Bye from me.